Back, we're less than 60 days away from the November election. Connecticut voters will head to the polls to vote for many big races, including for the state's next governor. Will Governor Ned Lamont win another term, or will challenger Bob Stefanowski be at the helm? The two candidates captured their fair share of headlines over the past week. Joining us to dig into where this race stands are Channel 3's chief political reporters Susan Raff and Dan Haar, who's a columnist and associate editor at Hearst Connecticut Media. Thank you both for being with us. Susan, I want to start with you. Something on the ballot that hasn't happened in 100 years. That's right. Big news, really. Governor Lamont not only endorsed as a Democrat, but now he's going to be on the ballot 3 times. He got the endorsement this past week from the Griebel-Frank party. And if people remember, that was Oz Griebel, who ran against Lamont and Stefanowski in the first go-around for governor. He tragically passed away. But that party believes in democracy, ranked choice voting. But it is significant in the fact that he's going to be, Lamont, on the ballot 3 times. So, you know, that really gives him a bit of an edge, where Stefanowski is really trying desperately to get the independent party nomination. Huge developments also in court as he challenges that party's decision. So right now, you know, Stefanowski gets 1 shot on the ballot, and Lamont will be on it 3 times. And Dan, I want to turn to you on that, because it was the Oz Griebel votes that many said in the last go-round that sort of tipped the tables here. So now, is this as big of a deal as people are making it out to be? Maybe 3 lines versus 1?
It's a big deal in the aggregate. When you look at Lamont on 3 lines and Stefanowski is only going to be on 1. By the way, even if he wins this lawsuit, he will not be on the Independent Party of Connecticut ballot. He is suing to get Rob Hoteling, the banker from Cheshire, off the ballot. So it's 3 ballots lines to 1, and in a combination, it adds up. Any one ballot may or may not be. This is a complicated equation. So, for example, Oz Griebel got 54,000 votes, 3.9% of the vote. That was just about the margin of victory, a little bigger than the margin of victory, but there's no saying where his votes came from. Partly they came from Lamont, partly they came from Stefanowski, and partly, especially with working families, these third parties bring in new people who wouldn't have voted. So it's a very complicated equation.
Right, and I think what's interesting that even if, as Dan mentioned, that Stefanowski does win, or, you know, his court challenge, okay? So he really wants to get Rob Hoteling off the ballot. And, you know, what does that say about democracy? You have an independent candidate, right? And in order to get on the ballot, he had to raise 7,000 signatures, collect 7,000 signatures. So, and what's interesting about this court case, really, it really comes down to established practice. Now, Stefanowski lost the endorsement at the independent caucus, right? He lost. It was very close. It was a tie vote. But they did ranked choice voting, which is something that the Griebel-Frank party supports. It's something that isn't altogether new in this country, but fairly new, right? And so even though the independent party doesn't have it specifically in their bylaws, it's been an established practice for over 20 years since they started. And it's actually the way Stefanowski got the nomination for the independent party just when he ran in 2018. So with that, you know, should he get the nomination, and should Rob Hoteling, who was the independent candidate that the party wanted, just be wiped off the map?
Well, we just saw a lot of talk about ranked choice voting from Sarah Palin, who saw it to her disadvantage in Alaska.
She lost to a Democrat.
Now, Dan, go ahead. Do you have something, Dan?
Ranked choice voting is an issue in and of itself that I think the legislature is going to want to look at, because it really does provide a stopgap against all of the extremist voting that you see in these closed primaries, right? Like, there's no universe where the Republicans as a whole had a better chance with Leora Levy than Themis Claris. That's a ridiculous idea. But yet she wins in a primary because it's the most extreme voters that vote. And the ranked choice voting is designed to eliminate that. I do want to make quickly the point that Stefanowski has an image issue with this lawsuit, not just a ballot issue. He's starting to spend a lot of time and energy and money on getting a guy off the ballot, and that's starting to be something that people are using against him. It works both ways.
I think the whole, discussion over ranked choice voting is very interesting. In fact, Lamont came out for the first time this week endorsing it and wants Connecticut to do that. I believe that's the first time that we've heard the governor endorse it. And I think Dan is right. I mean, the goal is to try to eliminate the extremes on either end and elect someone who appeals to the widest range of voters. But there are a lot of issues. So even though you have, ranked choice, you go in preference. So you have 1, 2, 3, and 4, and you rank them. But what happens when you have a recount? It becomes much more complicated. How about pre-polling? What about cross endorsements? There are all kinds of issues and things, and it is very confusing. We heard people in court in the Stefanowski lawsuit who were in the independent party who weren't quite sure, what to do and how the process works. So it's going to be a while, I think, before that figures out. But I agree with Dan. I think the image issue and trying to get the independent candidate off the ballot is something. And what does a Republican say when they go to the independent caucus? Don't vote for him. He can't win. Vote for me. So,
yeah. Well, certainly we'll hear more about that.
Just a quick point about the case before we move on. But Stefanowski's argument is they didn't follow their bylaws. The reality is that state law says they don't have to follow their bylaws. There was a case involving the chairman of the independent party, Mike Teleska, who lost because he claimed that the other guy didn't follow the bylaws. And you don't have to follow your bylaws in Connecticut if you are a minor party.
And should a court intervene? And should a court intervene and say, this is how you should run your party? I think the judge is going to say no. Well,
Judge Cesar Noble said he's going to say something next week, so we'll all find out about that. Dan, I want to ask you about the image issue with Stefanowski. We did see this week this Parents' Bill of Rights, which seemed to me sort of be moving more towards the Republican base. Is that how you viewed it?
There's two parts of that. I hesitate to call it a manifesto. That's a loaded word. But there were two parts of that program. One is dog whistles and direct appeals to the far right in respect to transgender and arming schools, not arming teachers, but securing schools and the mask mandate. He attacked a mask mandate that doesn't exist. Right. So that's obviously the other way. He also had some good moderate ideas about tutoring and about other what was the other one, Susan? It was tutoring and
voucher system for public schools.
Clean air.
Yep.
Clean air and tutoring. Those are moderate ideas.
They're moderate, but I also.
A little bit of both.
They are moderate, but I think what was interesting to me is that Stefanowski's trying to mobilize what is pretty much an organized group of people. I think the T-shirt said "Moms for Stefanowski." These are people who don't want masks or vaccines in schools, and the conversation of what kids are being taught. Stefanowski made a comment that kids can't even tie their shoes, and yet they're being taught about sexual gender and orientation. That's not true. I mean, kids are 6th through 8th grade, but these are parents who don't want that. And I think what's interesting is that he's trying to get their support. He's looking for the support of a group that's already kind of mobilized.
All right, we're gonna have to leave it right there. We're all out of time. Susan Raff, Dan Haar, via Zoom. Thank you both for being with us once again here on CT22.